Welcome to our seventh annual DMU Pride at De Montfort University in conjunction with DMU Women. I'm Julie Fish. I'm Professor of Social Work and Health Inequalities here at De Montfort University, and I'm really pleased to have you all here to take part in this discussion with the phenomenal woman that is Lady Phyll. Her name is Phyll Opoku-Gyimah, and she is commonly known as Lady Phyll. So today the plan is to have 30 minutes questions from me, and then we'll open it up to all of you, because I'm sure you'll have lots of burning questions that you would like to ask our speaker today. Lady Phyll really needs not too much of an introduction. Her achievements are phenomenal. She has, she's the UK founder of UK Black Pride, the co-founder of UK Black Pride. She's the director of Kaleidoscope Trust, which we hopefully will talk a little bit about later, and the patron of the Albert Kennedy Trust. The first question I wanted to ask Lady Phyll, if she can be brought into the room, is: hello, Lady Phyll. Lovely to see you.
Oh, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Julie. And, thank you to DMU Pride and DMU Women. So it's a pleasure.
And my first question is just a little, to tell us a little bit about you, and to tell us about, we know something about your achievements already, but I'd like to know a little bit more about who you are. And my understanding is that your grandmother played some part in supporting your activism as you were growing up. Could you tell us a little bit about her and your relationship with her?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when we talk about activism, I think it comes in many, many different forms, and there's so much that I've done that I continue to do. But for me, it's all about people and the communities in which I work for, with, and who I serve. So my grandmother was my inspiration, alongside my own mother and my daughter, around how and what I do. I saw my grandmother worked tirelessly, in Ghana to help build a church. So she was very, very active in the church, and she was one of the first women to speak up about the patriarchy, but not using those words, but saying women have a place in the church, and this is how we rally round the troops. And she'd give the stories around Yawa Santaway, who was the warrior woman that stood up against the British rule that came in to steal the golden stool in Ghana. So for me, watching her and realizing that, she was this formidable, strong woman that would never speak English to me, however. She understood and could speak, but she'd never speak English. She would always say, when you go into a meeting, when you go into, the challenge, make sure you're never by yourself. Come with your allies and come with your strongest people that are there to support you. So I think I've taken that through my working career, and just a bit of a snapshot of what I've done. I started off within the civil service, and when you had panel typist or the pool room, I was the grade which was the admin assistant, and worked my way up. And I was in Hertfordshire at the time, so the civil service was very white. It was very male dominated, and you would call your manager or your boss, or however you wish to term it, Mr. Williams or Miss Bryant or whatever their name is, just not by their first name. And it struck me that, it's so frustrating. I would never be fitted for promotion, because you had to be fitted for promotion first. And I was like, this may not be the place for me. So I joined the trade union, which was PCS, that represented civil servants. And then I got active as shop steward, understanding how trade unions worked. I did a course at Ruskin University to understand labour relations. And of course, it had to be Ruskin for me, because I think of employment rights and trade union relations. Then getting involved in PCS, I applied for a job there, and I took a job as a negotiator for the bargaining area of Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defence, and learnt so much about what we negotiate for in terms of terms and conditions and so forth. Then fast forward, being part of PCS, it taught me so much, and I guess it also helped me frame out and structure out UK Black Pride, which was born in 2005. And, I guess we'll come on to why UK Black Pride was born. And then ever since then, I guess for me, my conscience doesn't allow me to just stay silent or not do anything. So I've always taken up a number of roles, very much through that intersectional lens that we talk about, because as a Black woman who's out and classes herself as a lesbian from a particular class or a background, that those overlapping factors, you may endure or face discrimination based on race, based on sex, based on sexuality or sexual orientation, based on class. So for me, I could never divorce myself from that. So a lot of the work I do, whether it's around youth engagement, working with maturer, I don't say older now, I've reached a particular age, but maturer LGBT people and the issues that they face, it felt like a natural segue. And unfortunately, my grandma's no longer here with us, but she definitely lives within me, because she's what I would call the warrior and the fighter.
That's just an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so it's passed down the generations, hasn't it? I think that's just a lovely and inspirational story as well, about, working your way up from the typist pool. That's really inspiring for all of us. The next question I wanted to ask, which is, your grandmother was a role model for you, and just so how important, work in the church is, because it's how you reach women, isn't it? It's you go to the places where women are, and that seems to me to be a good way of doing activism. So now you are a role model, because among many other things, you were featured in Vogue last summer alongside Marcus Rashford and Adwa Adoe. Can I just have the first slide, please, Stuart? So this is the cover. I think the whole of the magazine was given towards Black and brown role models. So could you tell us a little bit about what being a role model means to you?
Yeah, so Julie, I used to squirm when people say, "Oh, you're such a role model," because I think that we all have a duty to model in a particular way that we would like to see society behave. And, I still kind of squirm now, but if we take the concept of role modeling, and the young people that I work with and the two people that I've mentored, for me, that it's definitely about showing representation, visibility of who we are and where we position ourselves in society. It's about being accountable and open and transparent about the work you do, and also being honest that I'm not always going to get this right, but I'm here to work with you, hear your experiences, and really find different ways of amplifying that. I think there are, and this is not shaming anybody, but there are some people who get titles of role modeling and do things for accolades that actually doesn't center the people who are at the heart of what we want to see changed in the world. So that's why I've always felt slightly uncomfortable with it. But visibility, representation, and making sure that we can open doors and spaces which we've not historically been part of, so we can be part of that decision making.
It's important about whose voices are heard, isn't it? And having a diversity of voices, because otherwise we just perpetuate the status quo, don't we?
Most definitely.
Yeah. So you once famously said that you were made in Ghana and born in Islington, London, which is a lovely thing. So Ghana stands out for me as one of the first places that won its independence from British colonial rule in 1960. And Kwame Nkrumah, who was the president at the time, was quite influential across Africa about a vision for Pan-African futures. And it's a bit of a double question in terms of what does your Ghanaian ancestry mean to you, and maybe broader than that if you can, but yeah.
Yeah. So being, the saying about made in Ghana, born in Islington, is because I'm so connected to who I am, being from Ghana. I have such a strong and a long history of warriors. And if you look up what the word Ghana is supposed to mean, it means warrior.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that sense, when I'm speaking to people, I'm like, yes, I'm an African woman who, although born in Britain, is a lesbian African warrior woman, because that warrior, which is not just about fighting, but is about standing true to the truth that you wish to speak, is about making sure there's a protection over people who are often voiceless, is a protection over the communities that you work with. So, protection and compassion also comes with it. And those things are really important for me. But being Ghanaian, my language is important, and we have over so many, gosh, I can't even remember. And if there are any Ghanaians on the line, don't be upset because I can't remember how many languages are spoken. But, both my mother and father are from 2 different tribes. So, they came to this country because it was kind of frowned upon that an Ashanti man would marry a Fanti woman. And being from those 2 different tribes and the different languages, you are who your mother is. But then I very much see myself as an Ashanti woman because of that history of, protection over our golden stool, which I keep on going on about. And not just our language, but our culture, our heritage, our understanding of what we do when we're memorializing and celebrating one's life. Our traditions that still continue now. And you can also see it in some of our Caribbean islands, the way they may celebrate something. The sound of talking drums, which are drums that are used as a signal. And I guess in enslavement and slavery, hearing those talking drums could help you identify what tribe you're from, or what we're singing to, or what the beat of the drum is banging to. So there's an instant connection there. And I guess ancestors, I walk with ancestors, or ancestors walk with me, and they certainly guide my path. And when you're named as a child, when you have your naming ceremony as a young Ghanaian child, you're named after a day of the week. And you'll also be named after somebody who would be there to protect you. So my grandmother's, on my father's side, mother is who guides and follows and protects me.
Oh, that's a lovely story. That's just really important to know about that connection. And I was aware about you're named after the day of the week. So there'll be lots of people with your name, I guess, in Ghana, which is a real other nice sense of connection with the land and the people and the culture. Yeah.
Actually, Julie, just to sort of add, I think there's one thing about our traditional cloth, which is called the kente cloth. And there are so many different meanings to when you wear that. So the yellow shows richness and wealth, and the green in the kente and also in the flag, is about the lands that you wish to prosper. And the red is about is it the green? to prosper, fruitful, and harvest. And, you know, then we've got the black star in the middle, because we are that black star, and some of that has been used in like Marcus Garvey's sort of strategy of black star liners and how we need to mobilize and organize in very different ways.
Wow. Okay. Right. Well, I'm learning an awful lot now. That's just, yeah, that's just great. Can I just say how did that kind of translate into your work in the UK? Because you're the co-founder of UK Black Pride, as we've said earlier, and you started off, I think, in Southend-on-Sea with about 500 participants. And you've moved now to London, to Haggerston Park, I think it was in 2019, with 10,000 people in attendance. Stuart, can we just have the slide up for that? Just so here's you in 2019, I think, and then a sense of the audience, and it just looks, I've seen some of the videos, they're just phenomenal. Can you tell us a little bit about why you co-founded UK Black Pride and what you're kind of thinking, you know, we can gain from it?
Yeah, sure. And I love the fact that you've asked me the question about, you know, why I've co-founded UK Black Pride, because often I'm asked the question, sorry, it's a little windy and the sea's blowing in the background, not to make anyone jealous. There we go. So I'm often asked, you know, why is there a UK Black Pride? And I don't answer the question anymore. I'm like, well, what if there wasn't a UK Black Pride? What that would mean for, you know, 10,000 people. So in 2004, I was running a Black lesbian women's organisation called BLUK. BLUK, Black Lesbians in the UK. And much of our activity was online. So we took this offline and we went to Southend. And the origins behind Southend was because when I was young, my dad, we couldn't afford to really go on holiday so much. So Southend, Broadstairs, Margate, those were our areas. And Southend I absolutely loved. And many of the women who were part of this organisation were asylum seekers or had come straight from their country and had never seen anything outside of central London. So it was an opportunity to connect with the sea, to have a spiritual awakening moment, to connect with each other and, understand our shared commonalities. And it felt so liberating and empowering that as I was walking back to the coach, I said, oh my gosh, this feels absolutely amazing. And I think that there needs to be, just like there is in Atlanta, a Black Pride. And a couple of people laughed and they said, oh my gosh, Phyll, here you go again with your weird ideas. That will never happen in the UK. And then 2005 was the initial UK Black Pride. But Julie, if I can just say that getting to the stage of 2005, I want people to understand that UK Black Pride didn't just happen. It was born out of a necessity, a frustration, and a need to have that. You know, there was so much propaganda and hate from far-right organizations. There was anti-Blackness, there was homophobia, Islamophobia. So for me, the time was not just only about celebrating, but it's about how we challenge those forms of discrimination that touch our lives. So I then went to a number of key people in the mainstream LGBT, those who have fought Section 28 and understand or should understand marginalization and discrimination, and said, I need your help. I need to know how we run a pride, which will be a Black Pride for, you know, African, Asian, Caribbean, Middle East and Latin American people. And I kid you not, I was sneered at, I was laughed at, and somebody at that table, and excuse my language, audience, turned around and said, why don't you F off and go back to where you came from?
Oh, no.
So for me, there's always been a resistance to setting up movements. But when you look at history, the history of the civil rights movement didn't just come about because somebody was upset and wanted to do something for the sake of doing it. It came about because of that resistance to our beings, to human rights, to civil liberties. So it meant you had to take a stance, and that's exactly what we did with UK Black Pride, and had the first one, which cost us £427.77.
That is just so fantastic. So could you give us a flavour? There may be people in the audience today who've never been or might be worried about going. Could you just give them a brief flavour about what it is, what it's like?
Yeah, so from the moment you walk into UK Black Pride grounds where we're holding this in Haggerston, you are met and greeted with, of course, there's security at the beginning, but you're met and greeted with a park full of people who are living their best life, or just feeling so comfortable in their skin, because this space and place is not just a safe space, but it's also a brave space. It's a place where you can dress how you wish to. You've got so many different languages spoken, so many different shades of black and brown. You have got a space for those who are differently abled and disabled. You've got a space where our trans people can speak their truth to power about what we need to do different and better. You've got a place where young people are holding workshops on, what they need to see, whether it's an intergenerational conversation or discussion. And then you've got the main stage where it's talent from within our community, where we're trying to mainstream it. And of course, we'll have a headliner and speakers from not just in the UK, but around the world. So from J-Flag Jamaica to the Iranian LGBT group, there is a platform for us to amplify all that we're doing.
So it works on lots of different ways, doesn't it? Giving people a voice that might not get to play in front of an audience of 10,000. And then that kind of sense of solidarity and community about being with people like us. Mm-hmm. And then also that kind of sense around being who you are, living your authentic self. But all of those things are really, really important, aren't they? And just a good kind of sense of that, because the next question is kind of, the reason almost why we have UK Black Pride, because last year we saw in Minnesota the killing of George Floyd. It wasn't a gay man, but there are lots of black gay men and black people of colour from LGBT communities who are killed each year. And it gave rise to some of the biggest protests around the globe. It was just phenomenal. It's often suggested that police brutality is a US specific problem, and that we kind of focus our attention very much on the States. But data analysed by the Runnymede Trust has suggested that 509 BAME people lost their lives in police custody between 1991 and 2014. And these issues are really important to us at De Montfort University, because our previous Chancellor, who stepped down just last year, was Baroness Doreen Lawrence. So could you just talk to us a little bit about the connection between UK Black lives and in the US?
Absolutely. So, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, and I hope for anybody watching and listening that, especially if you are Black and from POC communities, that you're not feeling triggered at the moment. But when we saw this resurgence of Black Lives Matter, as you said, Julie, across the globe, nobody was not speaking about this, whether it was negative or positive. For me, and I'll just give a 3-second trigger warning. For me, seeing George Floyd, who could have been my dad, my brother, my uncle, my cousin, my nephew, whoever, or could have been a family member, to witness 8 minutes and 46 seconds of someone being murdered on the streets was not a surprise to me, because that is the experiences of what we see on an everyday occurrence. And it just so happened, because, and maybe there's a combination of things, that we were COVID and lockdown. So there was a different level of attention and a lens and a light poured on this, because we see this all the time. But what it showed us is that it's either you are speaking up and standing out against these forms of atrocities that happen to Black and POC people, or you're not. And the connection that you speak about, you know, if you take Stonewall riots, 1969, the people that were behind that were trans and gender non-conforming Latino X and Black people, who were talking very much about police brutality, the lack of housing and safety, education and access to health. And when you look at what's happened with Black Lives Matter and even UK Black Pride, about what we campaign and lobby on, it is about the police brutality. Many of us come from countries like Ghana or Nigeria or India, which have had draconian laws that criminalized LGBT people. So it's the same about fighting against this police brutality. And look at what we've seen with SARS in Nigeria, the police force that are attacking people. So there's a natural connection, and we cannot say Black Lives Matter if we're not talking about all Black lives. If we're not talking about LGBT Black lives, disabled Black lives, trans Black lives. And for me, the synergies and the connections are real. And I mentioned at the beginning, my work is intersectional. And the lens and approach that I take around this theory is that, you know, if you wish to be an ally, just because you may not have the lived experience of being Black or being trans or being disabled, that allyship has to be rooted in solidarity, because if it is not, then it's not allyship. So I think that the connections of different struggles have to be looked at in so many different lenses. You know, right here and now in the UK, there is still deaths in custody. We saw what happened around Sarah Reid, and we know that there's, oh my gosh, Griffiths, the surname, Sylvester, people who have died in police custody. And, you know, you can even go back to Richard Stone, you know, the Macpherson report, that it highlighted over 32 recommendations because of institutionalized racism within the Metropolitan Police. Now, of course, not all police are bad, and that's not what I'm here to say. And I'm not here to talk about defund police at all. I'm just saying that the root causes of some of this are so structural and systemic that they span right back to the way Britain has treated Black people. So we can go back to colonialism, we can go back to enslavement and slavery, we can go back to what Britain has benefited from and how it has used the labour off the backs of Black and brown people. And until those systems of oppression have been broken and often dismantled because they're so antiquated and bureaucratic, we're always going to find ourselves in this hierarchy of oppression where many people are treated differently. And that's where, in my personal opinion, and I make clear it's my personal opinion, COVID, how it has impacted Black and brown communities in a more disproportionate way. You have to look at socioeconomic, you have to look at one's status of where they are, what they can access and what they can do. And again, we can talk about Black lives not mattering even in the healthcare system.
Yes.
So I'll stop there before I feel like...
No. And in fact, Stuart, would you just give us slide 3, please? So this was the slide I just prepared for the question on allyship, but I think that you've answered it really well. So this is the civil rights movement, the black and white photograph at the top, and then the bottom photograph was Black Lives Matter in the UK, and it was taken actually a screenshot from one of your interviews last year. But I think that's really helpful, because I think a lot of people, particularly young people, want to step up. How can we all step up together and be a supportive ally? And I think you've talked us through some of that. I think I probably only got time for just one quick question, if that's okay. I've got about 6 or 8 left, but I'm not going to ask all of them, unfortunately. So this is a bit of a list, so I'll just need to look at my notes at the same time. So Nigella Lawson, Roald Dahl, Alan Bennett, Dawn French, Jennifer Saunders, David Bowie, Alan Bennett, Howard Gale. What do Benjamin Zephaniah, what do they all have in common with Lady Phyll? They've refused a Queen's honour. And you've been asked lots of times about why you refused it, but my perspective is slightly different. You're part of over 400 people have refused a Queen's honour in the last 10 years. So you're up there. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, as soon as you started reading the names, of course, I knew where you were going with this. So yes, 2016, I was nominated to be awarded one of the Queen's Honours. And let me just start by saying, for anyone who has accepted their MBE, CBE, OBE, congratulations to you, because it is about the acknowledgement and achievement of what you've been doing. However, for me, as a trade unionist, as somebody who understands the toxic legacy of the word empire and what colonialism has done to the countries that I work in, especially around LGBT rights, for me, if there's been no real acknowledgement or apology of colonialism, how Britain has benefited, and the sort of regressive laws that have been left behind that criminalize people, I couldn't possibly accept anything that really elevates itself over the people that I serve. I also think that there's a lack of transparency in the honour system, which again is my personal opinion. The toxic nature of empire leaves an absolutely awful taste in my mouth, and to know that I would accept something and then not be able to speak about racism in the way that I should, or speak truth to power, means that I would be limiting my voice. Yeah, so, and there's also so many countries around the world and also within the Commonwealth which have these Victorian colonial era laws, and my day job is around upholding human rights for LGBT plus people within Kaleidoscope Trust.
Yeah, could you tell us something about Kaleidoscope Trust? And
yes, sure.
Yeah.
So this amazing LGBT plus human rights charity, which works internationally, our primary focus is around LGBT rights within the Commonwealth and those countries which still criminalise. And we do our work through a number of different means. We have what's called the Commonwealth Equality Network, which is TCEN for short. Okay. And TCEN are a group of organizations, civil society organizations based around Africa, Asia, Caribbean, Pacific, and also some in Europe. And we as Kaleidoscope Trust really use our leverage and knowledge to unlock and open up funding, to pressure the government to understanding their commitments to human rights, to looking at what's called the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Like you've got, I believe, number 5 will be around leaving no one behind. So us, what does that really mean? And in countries like Uganda, where they, or even Rwanda or others, where they don't want to talk about LGBT, it's our role within TCEN to make sure we find language that links it to those SDGs, and finding ways to support legal reform, because we don't do the legal reform. We leave that to the experts like Human Dignity Trust, but we assist in the groundwork of changing hearts and minds, looking at strengthening civil society, capacity building, and also movement building, which may mean the entry points with high commissioners, diplomats, and other forms of dignitaries that are able to use their influence. So I hope that's a bit of a snapshot.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you another question about that, and that's so I've watched one of your interviews with Evan Davis and Dustin Lance Black, which was just a phenomenal interview. It was just wonderful. But one of the final questions that you were asked was, and both the men, I think, both agreed that the fundamental right in the West has been same-sex marriage. And I kind of thought about that, and I thought, as somebody who's benefited myself from same-sex marriage, but would I then say that that was the most important right for people? Because even if you think in the UK, the majority of people are not in formalized relationships. They may be in long-term relationships, but they haven't chosen to marry. So how is that right necessarily benefiting the majority of people? And so my question is, what do you think are the most important LGBT rights on a global scale? What are those? What are the things that we most need to work towards?
Well, I guess,
it's a big question, I'm sorry.
No, it is. And I guess, there's a responsibility that Britain have to take in those colonial era laws, and it's helping reverse them, eradicate them, eliminate them, and removing them from penal codes that exist. I think that it's about well-resourced civil societies, and allowing for registration of LGBT organizations so that they can do the very necessary and important work. I think also making the connection around women and girls' rights and LGBT rights, and making sure that that is enshrined in the way we work and how we resource that work. I wouldn't say civil partnership or equal marriage is what is a priority. That is definitely something which sounds very global north, and we're so used to imposing what we think our views should be on the global south, and we've done that for so many years. So, of course, marriage will be important to some, but when you live in a country like Nigeria or Botswana, and the appetite and the hunger and the desire is to be recognized and valued and respected for who you are and not be criminalized and thrown in jail, marriage is the last thing on your mind. Yeah. So I would say there's a multitude of things, but marriage is not the priority, although it is still important.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I've got a couple of questions from the audience. Peter Fulgal has asked a couple of questions. What do you think about, what does Lady Phyll think about the toxic attacks on trans rights that are rife in the UK at the moment? And how can we be an ally?
Yeah, Peter, thank you so much for your question. And I guess, when we talk about human rights and the rights of all, trans people, our trans siblings at the moment are going through such an enormous amount of vitriol and attacks on a daily basis. I have friends like who are at the front line, whether this is Travis Alabanza, whether this is Monroe Bergdorf, whether this is Kuchenga Shane, and I constantly look and feel, you must be tired because it's relentless. So I guess for us who are not of the trans experience or the non-binary experience, we have to make sure that our allyship, which is very situational, right? Allyship is situational. We've got to make sure that we're able to, one, listen, two, ask the question around what more can I do as an ally? Where do you need my resource? Where do you need my help? Where do you need my voice? Not to wade in and say, this is what we're going to do. Three, making sure that if we are seeing the attacks on our trans family, is that we do tap people on the shoulder and say, you know what, I'm here for you. But there's something that I do, is not calling out people, but it's calling in people to say, listen, your BS is not to be accepted, especially when we're talking about rights for people. You cannot be about inclusion, equity, equality, diversity if you're hiving off people and not fully accepting our trans community. We are what I see as family. And the moment you attack one of us, it will happen to the next. And I guess there's that age-old, trade union poem that, they came for you first and I was left behind and it will be you next. I just don't understand how our trans siblings can be under such attack, and in a climate where we're finding ourselves with less funding, less resources, maybe there's regressive sort of policies being put in place, regardless of which government may be in power. It affects us all. And that's why I said, if your allyship is not rooted in solidarity, then ask yourself the question, what is it? And I love what Dumont University is doing, what your Pride Network is doing, what your Women's Network is doing, the way you're collaborating and working together to make sure that you can take that intersectional approach to amplify all of this work. And I guess it's about utilizing the conversation that there is space and place for our trans siblings in our networks, in our universities, in our colleges, and in society. And once we have a more unified voice, we're able to make sure we're turning up the volume on society, making it impossible for them to turn it down. So sorry, Peter, I've gone on a rant, but your question was so important and I'm glad that you asked that. So thank you.
We've got another question from Ellie Higson. What does Lady Phyll think of the use of umbrella terms in workplace settings such as BAME and to some extent grouping LGBT experience together?
So, thank you, Ellie. My personal opinion of the word BAME, I don't necessarily like that terminology, but I guess people identify in very different ways. And whilst we know that there's some anti-Blackness in certain instances, some of our Asian comrades and siblings do not identify under that political banner of Black. So, the terminology BAME may suit the context for that situation. I think umbrella terms can be good, but make sure that you have got the space, or you've carved out the space for particular groups to be able to speak to that experience. Because when we lump things all together in one bracket, there's often an erasure of people's identity or experiences. And that doesn't create the environment for which you want to work in or study in. So, whatever your strategies or plans are within your networks, it's about making sure that you have space and room for people to speak to those experiences. I hope that's helped answer that. But Ellie, I guess if you're taking the intersectional approach, which I go on about a lot, those overlapping factors, you will ultimately create that space, because you can't just, a woman is not just a woman. A woman may be Black, a woman may be disabled, a woman may be, LBT, she may even be gay, if that's how she identifies. So in looking at your women's network, actually, you've got to look at all of those other factors as well.
There's a question from Stephanie Deje. Hello, Lady Phyll. Thank you for sharing your time with us from St. Lucia. I would like to know what made you stick to your plan to create a Black Pride in spite of the pushback.
Oh, Stephanie, thank you for your question. So, I mean, I'm known as a stubborn person, so I will stick it out, sometimes even if it's to my own detriment. But Black Pride was never, ever about me. It was about the inequalities, the injustice that I saw. It was also about where we didn't see Black and brown faces in mainstream prides. And again, this is about no attack on any other pride, but they were not inclusive. We kind of looked like marching ants, and we were given tokenistic spots to speak when a Black person or a brown person cannot speak in its entirety for our whole communities. So given the fact that we want to celebrate, we want to make sure our culture and our heritage and traditions and values were met, we had to keep on going. We had to find ways to find money. And one of the things that drives me is when somebody tells me no, it's always going to be, you cannot just say no to me. You have to give me a really valid reason that it's going to hurt people if I take route A or if I take route B. So the driver has been always about community, has been about people, and it's always been about my grandma at the back of my mind, knowing about how she mobilized and organized and worked with people as opposed to worked against people. So I hope that answers that, Stephanie. But don't tell anyone that I'm stubborn.
I think to achieve anything, you have to be fairly single-minded, don't you? There's a comment rather than a question from a member of staff who's our head of equality and diversity, Chris Hall, who said that DMU was one of the first higher education institutions to adopt a trans inclusion policy. And the plan is to revamp it this year, which will be just great to see. I think that in the first year, it was just really helpful because, so I think it was about 5 years ago, we knew that we had 200 people who identified as non-binary because we collected data on that. So that was, I think it's really important to know. And then there's another question from Ellie. Thank you. Yes, intersectionality, if it comes first, highlights the importance of individuality. I really appreciate your response. So that's quite nice. Can I ask you a question of mine? I'm not sure that I'm sure Laura will tell me if there are any more questions that I've missed. But I had a question about statues, and I wondered whether you would be happy to tell us about statues, just for everybody else's benefit. Stuart, would you mind just showing us slide 4? So there's a statue of Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if people will know, but he was very important, I think, in Zimbabwe, but across in many countries in Africa. For colonizing Africa, and there is a statue up to him because he gave a lot of money to Oriel College in Oxford University, and the university hierarchy have just recently agreed to remove a statue. So that's their decision to remove the Cecil Rhodes statue. And just the slide there just gives you kind of what we're talking about. If you wouldn't mind taking that down, please, Stuart, that would be great. Thank you.
So, Julie, you know, the issue around statues, I guess when people are already hurt through the experiences and the lives that have been passed down through generations of slavery, enslavement, and so forth, and you have the opportunity to study or be in a certain place and you see something which negatively has impacted the way you are seen by the world, and this statue is glorified and amplified, but there again is no talk or statue of those who have been change makers, those who have really wanted to ensure the colonization of our lives, our bodies, which are struggles, are not amplified, are not acknowledged, and are not they do not receive apologies. But when you have Cecil Rhodes there, and I remember meeting some of the people from the Cecil Rhodes Campaign Must Fall campaign, I was struck and I was moved by a young Black man who said, I have to walk past it all the time. And what I'm studying is only what I see there. And it goes to some of the conversation you and I had before about decolonizing the curriculum. Because if all we see is around the lens of white men who, and I say this not to make anyone feel guilty, because guilt is self-indulgence, right? This is about our own uncomfortable nature of what we see, what we feel, how we experience it. It may mean that those statues have to come down. It doesn't mean that the history should be erased and not taught or not shown. It just means that we're not going to glorify somebody that has negatively impacted Africa or parts of Africa when you have got Black and brown people that will see that. So I'm not going to be online to tell you, yet take them down by hook or by crook, pull it down and throw it into the canal, because I'm not wanting to advocate for that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. But I don't want to see it. I don't want it to be part of the history that's been told only. You know, my own experience of going to school in Hertfordshire and being taught everything around the Battle of Hastings, 1066, and, you know, Henry VIII's wives, I can recite and name them all, but we're not taught about the impact and the history and the richness and the beauty of Africa, of Asia, and what we have given and what has been taken. We're not taught about the inventions of what we've done to contribute to the growth of Britain. But yet still we're able to see a statue of Cecil Rhodes, which actually it hurts just as much as it hurts as thinking about the word empire.
Yeah. Thank you for those insights. That's really, really helpful. I mean, it was interesting because Mark Quinn was involved in a statue that was put up overnight, but it was taken down in Bristol, you know, to replace the statue of Edward Colston.
Yeah.
And I know that there were issues around how it went up because there was no consultation, but it was a fantastic statue of a very powerful Black woman who was part of that, you know, the kind of getting us to rethink our relationship with statues. And so we've got, the questions are coming in thick and fast now, so I'm hoping to get as many as I can. There's one from Alfonso Pizzella. How can we, working in health and social care, support LGBTQ plus Black people? So it's around culturally competent services, not thinking about LGBT people just as white people. It's making sure that we are really inclusive.
Okay, so Alfonso, thank you for that. You know, at the moment, UK Black Pride is looking at how we engage and consult our communities, because often we hear organisations say, oh, well, you know, the Black and brown communities or African Asian people are so hard to reach. And I think that that's such a lazy term for people to use. We're not hard to reach. It just means that the services you're providing are not inclusive enough. So I guess what can be done is looking at the policies that you have and finding much different and innovative ways of engaging with communities. So Alfonso, you could contact UK Black Pride and say, well, we have this survey that we'd like to put out, making sure the narrative feels right and feels good. Is this something that you can help promote? or we have this particular event. Is there anybody in UK Black Pride that can come and speak to the experiences around whether it's mental health services that are provided to them, AIDS, HIV, and what that's meaning for how we access PrEP, whatever it may be, that there are always organisations, and I do put UK Black Pride at the forefront of that, that you can reach out to. But you've also got Prepster, you've got Exist Loudly, you've got Blackout UK. There are so many organisations that can help you shape your policy so it does feel truly inclusive and representative, and it does feel like it's more engaging on a meaningful level. And I hope that's helped, Alfonso.
Yes. Can I ask? There's one from Marion Cowie. What are the great ways for white non-people of colour LGBT plus community to support Black Pride? I'm very conscious, and I think a number of people will share Marianne's thoughts about this, about not taking up space at events that aren't there for me. So it's just about kind of, you know, being part but not taking over, I think, is the question.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Marianne, for your question. I guess this is something that's asked of us all the time. And on the UK Black Pride website, we've got frequently asked questions. So, you know, every year my best friend from Norway comes over to UK Black Pride, typical blonde hair, blue eyes, and she understands that UK Black Pride is by us and for us. And if you are non-Black and you're going to enter this space, then you sign up to the vision and the mission and the values, and understand that you are there as a visitor, as a supporter, as an ally, to really support the Black and brown community who happen to be queer, LGBT plus. But I think it's incredibly important for everyone to share in our space and understand, as long as behaviors are right. I'm not going to go into a network of differently abled or disabled people who are talking about the accessibility that they need and start saying, oh, well, you know, it's okay, you've got a wheelchair ramp, it's fine now, because I'm being rude and disrespectful. But I would enter that space knowing that I'm there to listen, to either enjoy, to celebrate, and think of better ways of supporting my comrades in an allyship form. But everyone is welcome. And Marianne, you know, if you see the pictures, our videos, we are also known as Europe's largest event of African, Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American and Caribbean descent people. But we also have our white comrades and our sponsors who make UK Black Pride possible and make it so it can be free. So you are very welcome. And just Julie, just before we go, because I know time's wrapping up, I saw a question. If you wish to get involved in UK Black Pride or Kaleidoscope Trust, you know, just drop us a line. There's like an online form, you can contact us. I guess some people can do volunteering, whether it's your transferable skills of you understand finance, IT, you've been part of event planning, you want to volunteer on the day and support us, you know, social media, we are open to it all. And in terms of Kaleidoscope Trust, I will always say donate, donate, donate for both organisations if you're able to. But to get involved, it will also mean, you know, understanding the footprint and what our resources and our money and our funding is doing within the countries over the Commonwealth. So, yeah. And any questions I've not answered, I'm happy to respond back to you afterwards, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Lady Phyll, thank you ever so much for your time. We've just given us so much to think about, but also you're just so kind and so inclusive. It just makes, I think everybody will agree with me in saying, okay, we just want to volunteer. We just want to help whatever way we possibly can. I know I said earlier that same-sex marriage isn't the most significant thing, but I just love this image. So just bearing in mind with that caveat, I just think that we don't see images like that, but it was shared by Women's Art I had 6 or 7 such images, but this one stood out for me as just being absolutely wonderful. As a kind of a, you know, in 10 years or 20 years time, we would hope that there's same-sex marriage throughout the world. But there's a way to go to before we get to there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, and for your audience. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. Thank you.
Take care.